My name is Kristen Alford. I am a professor here at Calvin College. I teach social work and public health here, and I'm very honored to have been asked by Family Futures to moderate this panel. As many of you know, April is Child Abuse Prevention Month, or Prevention and Awareness Month. And I think it's really important if we start our morning off by just thinking about a few statistics in the state of Michigan. And many of you probably know these really sad statistics, but I think it's important to just be reminded of them. First of all, on an average day, there's almost 220 cases of suspected child abuse or neglect that are investigated. And in 2014, and this is in the state of Michigan, in 2014, these investigations resulted in over 21,000 confirmed cases of child abuse and neglect in Michigan, involving nearly 31,000 children who were survivor victims. And of these children, nearly 38% were under the age of 4. And so this is clearly a major problem here in Michigan, and it's important that we're all here today to think about these statistics and think about how we can prevent child abuse, and when it does occur, how do we respond to it appropriately, and how do we think about healing and wholeness in the face of trauma. And so I would like to just start out with the boring stuff, which is housekeeping. I'm from Calvin, as you can see, but also Susan Verweiss over in the corner is. And so if you have any questions about where things are, you can always come to one of us and we can help guide you. Probably easier if it's during the panel to go talk to Susan, although you may, if you want to be on the video, also come talk to me, and I can gladly direct you. But probably the most important thing are the bathrooms, and there are restrooms right outside of this room, so if you walk up into that kind of main area, the restrooms are right there, wedged, the elevator is wedged between them, I believe, and so you can see both of the restrooms there. Also, if you get the munchies, which I know some of us do sometimes, beyond what's available out there, if you go up the stairs and cross through this building into the next building, we have our Johnny's Cafe, where you can also get things like water, soda, anything in terms of eating. And then there's also our bookstore in case you feel like you need to do some additional reading. I know some people do like that when they come to Calvin to visit a bookstore. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask Susan. Also, I know this second table right here is all students, and so they can also direct you, and a few at the third as well. And so we can all gladly direct you anywhere you need to go. I would also like to note that we do have a table outdoors outside by the refreshments from Bethany Christian Services, the refugee foster care program, and they would love to talk with anyone who's interested after the panel. So feel free to visit that table as well. Okay, so today's panel was convened today by Family Futures, as I said, and this was as part of a larger grant initiative that they have funded through the Children's Trust Fund. And I didn't know much about the Children's Trust Fund until a few weeks ago, so I thought I would just let you know a little bit about them in case you also don't know. But the Children's Trust Fund is a nonprofit organization in the state of Michigan that does pretty much exactly what you might think of in terms of they leverage both private and public funding in order to promote health, safety, and welfare of children and families statewide. And part of their grant funding objective is that we do things during Child Abuse Prevention Month. And so I think this is a really great way to do something to promote April as Child Abuse Prevention and Awareness Month. And what they do at Children's Trust Fund really ties in nicely with Family Futures and their work. Family Futures, for those of you who don't know, seek to shape a community in which all children reach their full potential. And they do this through the offering of a variety of programs and services, including the Healthy Start parent coaching program, their Connections developmental screening program, the Resources Against Violent Encounters program for teenagers and adolescents, as well as several community education sessions like these. So today, in this community education session, we have 4 awesome panelists. And I am actually a gerontologist, which means I work with old people primarily, so I'm always excited to work with people who work with children. And so today, I'm just going to briefly introduce all 4 speakers. They might want to introduce themselves more as they speak. Each is going to speak for about 20 minutes. And then following all of the speeches and all of the presentations, we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. So I just encourage you, if you have a question, and I love questions, please jot them down, and so you don't forget them at the end. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce our speakers. Lucy Dyer-Joswick, MS, works as Chief Program Officer for Family Futures, where she leads the program department, directs communications, oversees agency operations. Lucy has spent over a dozen years working for I didn't want to say how many years because they all look very young, so. I always say it's kind of like introducing Doogie Howser, MD, for those of you who are old enough to know who Doogie Howser is. Anyway, so over a dozen years working for nonprofits who serve children and youth. Her specialized areas of interest include positive youth development, diversity, inclusion, equity education, communications, healthy relationships, volunteer management, LGBTQ inclusion-related causes, and issues of racism and inequity. And so today she's going to be speaking a lot about child abuse and neglect prevention. Our second speaker, Daniel Kuchan, he has a BS in psychology and an MPA from GVSU. He's a CPS investigator for Kent County. Prior to this work, he was a foster care worker in Muskegon County. He was also a CPS investigator and an ongoing worker in Ottawa County. He really got his passion and drive to be in this area when he worked in Pine Rest during college as a care provider, and also as he worked with Family Futures. And so today, Daniel's going to be discussing how we respond to suspected child abuse and neglect. Our third speaker, Dinetta Clark, has an MA in counseling psychology and is the director of community-based services at D.A. Blodgett St. John's. She also, and bless her heart, because I just went through this process, is a doctoral student, and I'm having a little bit of trauma myself just thinking about it. But as a doctoral student in counselor education and supervision at Western Michigan University. And Dinetta today is going to be talking a little bit, I should mention also that Dinetta has a wide range of experience in this area. She has worked pretty much in anything involving children and families, including foster care, in-home services, outpatient services, residential services, as well as in schools. So she just has a wealth of information, and so I think she'll be very able to talk about the effects of child abuse and neglect on children. And then finally, Lori Nyquist is an MA LLPC at Families Forever Counseling. Lori is a therapist who works with children, teens, and families with attachment and adoption-related issues. She's received extensive training in attachment, including participating in a professional training program in trust-based relational intervention at Texas Christian University's Institute of Child Development. She's an adoptive parent herself and has been working with adoptive families since 2009. And today she's going to help us better understand this idea of healing and resilience for those who have experienced childhood abuse and neglect. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Lucy.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And thank you all for being here today and joining us at this panel. As Kristen explained, I am Lucy Dyer-Joswick. I'm the Chief Program Officer for Family Futures, and I do have a few slides. That's the communication side of me shining through, so I believe that Kelsey's going to be clicking through those for me. So what I wanted to do, even though I am talking about prevention, is something that's certainly on the top of Family Futures' mind and of a lot of our workload, is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. So just to put some things in terms of context of what this panel is about, certainly child abuse and neglect is the focus, and that's what I will primarily discuss during my portion of time, but I couldn't do this justice without sharing with you this study, because I'm daily aware how many people don't know about it, so I need to share. So our context at Family Futures for what we have looked at over the past 30 years, we've been focused on preventing child abuse and neglect. Just this year, we changed our mission and we broadened our focus. And so we are really broadening this to be looking at these adverse childhood experiences and our role in preventing and also responding to these experiences. And so as that evolves, you'll certainly hear more from us in the community. But what the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, and what I believe is showing behind me so you can understand, was this was the largest study that has been conducted yet to date related to adverse experiences and their long-term health outcomes. So it was 17,000 individuals at Kaiser Permanente and the CDC that were asked a series of questions regarding their early childhood experiences, and then also asked a series of questions regarding their current health. And what they found was the largest known correlation that we've been able to find yet related to these experiences that you're seeing up on the screen behind me, to early death, to heart disease, to a serious amount of long-term negative health outcomes. And what they found, perhaps not as shocking, because I think we all knew in prevention work at least, that it's not just the impact of the adverse experience in the moment, but it is the lifelong experience that this truly shapes a child's neurodevelopment and their biology. But this really gave us evidence of what specifically is happening. And more heartbreaking, perhaps, is it gave us a glimpse into how common these experiences are. So when you think of the 17,000 people that they studied, they were primarily middle-class Americans, and they worked for the CDC. And of those individuals, 2/3 of them had at least one of these experiences, but 1 in 5 of them had 3 or more. So 1 in 5 of them had 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. And what they found through that study was that this doesn't only impact this child in the moment, but this truly impacts them for the rest of their life. If you can go to the next slide, Kaus. What they found here was that these adverse experiences, this is a new pyramid for you to familiarize yourself with, and you can certainly find more online, but these adverse childhood experiences cause these social and emotional and cognitive impairments, most certainly. There is still scientific gaps. This is, while this is something that is a fairly new study in terms of the 90s, when you come to scientific research, that's really new. The 90s wasn't that long ago in the scientific community. And so then it leads to the adoption of health risk behaviors, and this can lead to earlier diseases and ultimately an earlier death. And so I don't want to, I wanted to give you this context to know that as we're looking at the field of prevention, we're certainly not only looking at child maltreatment, as would be the traditional context of physical, sexual, emotional abuse and neglect, but really looking at these overall adverse experiences and what is our role now in preventing them, and what's our role in responding to them. So that was an important context for me to start with. And certainly, I can take more questions at the end related to ACE. Siri. Thought I was talking to her, excuse me. So what you have behind here is, how many of you are familiar with Bronfenbrenner? My good old students out there okay. So what I like to show when we're talking about the theory of prevention, and sorry that I keep looking behind me, but I want to make sure I'm talking about the right thing on the right slide. So what we have here at Family Futures, we really believe that if we're only looking at prevention in terms of the context of the individual, we're not going to be successful. So we really look at that in terms of the context of the entire system. And that's what we mean when our mission says to shape a community. So we're really not just looking at what can we do for the child, family, and the community well-being, of course, the center of this, but we want to look at what is it that needs to happen in terms of changing the system and in terms of changing the community to really make it a place where you can prevent these experiences from occurring. So you might be thinking to yourself, how? And no, you're not really preventing this because we just heard those horrible statistics. And that's a reality. I think it's important for us to be aware that the field of prevention is fairly new. In 1975 was when we first had a child protection law here in the state of Michigan. And so in my opinion, 1975 wasn't that long ago. Some of you might think it was, but it really wasn't. And so that just says something in terms of we have really high expectations in terms of stopping a problem that we really didn't define and put into law until 1975. So the field of prevention is still very new. And what we've known in those 41 years is that there certainly are some evidence-based models out there, which is what I'll spend the majority of the time talking to you about today in terms of what can prevent. But I want to give this context of all of the roles that each of us have to play when it comes to preventing child abuse and neglect. So just to explain this a little further, you can see that you have the child and the family and the community well-being in the center here. And certainly building the strengths of a family is one of the focus areas of prevention, is really focusing on that family unit as they are self-defined. But then you also have to be aware of the protective or the risk factors that this family is surrounded by. And you need to be cognizant of how you can reduce those risk factors that the family might be experiencing by then building the capacity for them to have additional opportunities to strengthen their family, strengthen their individual self-sufficiency, and also build those skills that they would need to be successful adults. Financially is often one of the areas that we need to be cognizant of. We know that abuse and neglect has a high correlation to being with those families that are in poverty, but that certainly does not mean that poverty means automatically that an individual is going to be abused or neglected. You can then see here that we have to be focused on the entire system of what's going on structurally. And I know this talks very theoretically, but one of the things that Family Futures, and not only Family Futures, but those that are focused on prevention, have come to realize in the past 40 years is that if we are not looking at prevention at more than child abuse and neglect, if we're really not looking at those social determinants of health, then we're not going to be successful. And so racism and health equity has really become a very strong force in terms of the prevention field, because we recognize what kind of disparities have been occurring in the child welfare field when it comes to race and other demographic factors in terms of our response, our implicit bias in our response, and also in terms of the prevalence. And then we also have been looking at how can we actually be measuring these results? So what kind of individuals are we coming into contact with, and how are we really measuring the long-term success of these programs to really know what would be the most effective? So if you'll go to the next slide, I want to get to talking about what those are, because that's the primary focus of mine. The protective factors, a show of hands by how many people have actually heard of the protective factors. I'm guessing a lot of you out here, all right. Well, I'm happy that the rest of you will know what they are when you leave this room. So what we're focused on and what we do all of our program design surrounding is instilling that the protective factors are part of Family Futures programs and services. And I'm going to list them as they are up here, but then I'm also going to share with you how we explain them to the families that we work with, because I think that's just as important. So you can see that nurturing and attachment, what that really means is helping parents connect with their children. And so helping parents understand how they can nurture their child's development and how they can form healthy attachments is critical. And that might be teaching a parent how to play, that might be teaching them what kind of milestones their child should be reaching, or just teaching them different theories about something that we use called mind-mindedness, which is how you can really have a healthy attachment with your child by responding to their needs from the moment that they come out cooing and babbling. And then knowledge of parenting is absolutely critical. I know this is a cheesy line that we all say, but kids do not come with instruction manuals. I have a master's degree in child development, which apparently on paper says that I know something about this. But when my 6-year-old was born, no, I really was tested. That is the final exam, is in terms of what you know academically can go right out the window. And so having someone that can guide you through what is it exactly that a 2-month-old should be doing? Is it okay that they're crying this much? What should I do when they cry this much? These are critical things that we don't automatically provide as a society, but that are really important for parents to be able to successfully parent their children. The difference between knowledge of parenting and knowledge of child development is that knowledge of child development is more about the context of the child, what I was just speaking of, and I actually got this flopped. So the milestones, the how to respond to a child's needs. But knowledge of parenting is often a little bit deeper of a exercise, and what you often have to go into there is knowing how you were parented. So a lot of the time what we're doing then is specifically is breaking old patterns. So if you yourself grew up in a household with lots of family dysfunction, or where violence was a solution, or where domestic violence was present, that can often be something that is actually honestly scientifically hardwired into your neurology, and you need to then be able to break that. And that's not something just that can be turned on with a switch. Often you really need to know, well, what is the alternative solution? How can you empower me with nonviolent discipline techniques? How can I better understand what my co-parenter, if there is a co-parent present, what their discipline style is, and how can we create communication to ensure that we're being consistent and on the same page when it comes to how we do parenting. The last couple here are parental resilience. This is one that I practice every single day. I'm not trying to joke around here, but I think that if those of you that are parents, you know that you'll have the days where you are always maybe exhausted, and you need to be able to bounce back, because we don't take vacation days as parents. We can't really take sick days as parents. And so building up that resilience for knowing how can I self-care. So often equipping parents with stress relieving techniques, equipping them with resources where they can gain these kind of supports, and helping them understand how they can bounce back from this adversity. And when they can't, having these social connections. So having groups of friends, having play groups, having individuals that they can talk to. Peer support is really essential when it comes to preventing child maltreatment, because it's increased when you are isolated. If you don't feel like you have someone that you can talk to about your frustration, or someone that you can express yourself to and get alternative ideas other than shaking your child or taking violent measures, that can often be the barrier between you having a breakdown and you not. Perhaps the most critical, and we are really fortunate in Kent County to have a lot of these, is these concrete supports for parents. So what this really means, the difference between having supportive friends and having concrete support, is that sometimes as good as friends might be, that's not enough. You need to know when you need to talk to a professional. Your friends also might not be down for providing you with all the food in their fridge, so you're going to need to know where you can go for concrete support, such as food banks, etc. So this concrete support can be as small as having a tool like our Family Resource Guide in your hand that can give you all the different resources available to navigate parenting, to knowing where different food banks are, to knowing where different health clinics are, whatever it might be that you specifically need. This is one of the critical supports. And how we go about delivering all of these, I know you gave a wonderful introduction to what exactly we do, but I want to talk about two specific programs, and then I think my time will be coming to an end. And that's our Kent County Healthy Start home visiting program. We do have our Kent County Healthy Start home visiting program manager in the front of the audience. Sorry, Brandy Alexander, if you have questions and I don't answer them, she can. But Kent County Healthy Start is a 19-year-old program, that 20-year-old program. See, I can't add very well. 20-year-old program here in Kent County, and it's a home visiting program, and it is the only accredited home visiting program in Kent County. I'm proud to say that. But what we do is we provide provide intensive support for families that have various risk factors for child maltreatment. And we can do that during the first 3 years of their children's life. And that really means that a family could be fortunate enough to have someone in their home as little as once a month, perhaps as frequent as once a week. And they're there to really create this customized roadmap for these families of what kind of support do they specifically need, because there is not a one-size-fit-all solution for getting parents and families safe and strong. There really needs to be that customized path. So our family support workers, which we do in conjunction with Arbor Circle and Catholic Charities, go out into these homes, and they are the navigators. They are the support system. They are the advocates, and they're the resources for hundreds of families each year. And we do know that home visiting is one of, if not the most effective measure of preventing child maltreatment that we've been able to study in the past 41 years of this. I do want to say we are not the only home visitors in town. There are a tremendous amount of home visiting services. We are so grateful to have that in Kent County. And honestly, if you haven't heard of them and you aren't referring to them, then we can talk afterwards and make sure that we can tell you more about all of them. One of the lower intensive services and a universal service that we offer is our Connection service. We actually have our Connections parent coach sitting way in the back there, Dana. And so what Dana does and what our Connections program does is we support 1 in 4 children that are under 5 are served by this program. We do developmental screenings to make sure that children are on track. When we do find a delay, which happens in about 15% of cases, then Dana is there or our other parent coaches to navigate the system with the parents to help them find where they might need to go next for an assessment or for additional treatment or support. And having those 2 services in addition to our pre-prevention program of RAVE, of making sure that teens understand what a healthy relationship looks like, that they can identify abuse that they might be experiencing right now in their homes, is really critical to ensuring that we're giving these protective factors to the whole community. So I will take questions at the end, but I think I've taken my time up.
Hello, and thanks for having me. I'm glad I'm here today. I thought I might not make it. I'm a current investigator, so this morning I was working on investigations. I have a court hearing at 2 o'clock today, and afterwards I'll be doing investigations all night because I'm also on call. Never a dull moment as a CPS worker. One of the main reasons that I offered to come here and wanted to come here is an exercise of teaming and collaboration, because a lot of times we don't know a lot about the other person's role, and I found that the better relationships are between different people in different parts of the system, and the better the wraparound effort is amongst all of us, the better the outcomes are overall. So I'm coming here to learn from the other people that I'm with here and learn from your questions and comments, and as well as just trying to share some perspective about the CPS side of things. As far as the outline here, I'll talk a little bit about the investigative process. I just have a few things I'd like to go over just for referral source or the mandated reporters, and then just a couple other points that I'd like to make. If a referral source, call into CI or send in to the centralized intake, or you send in to 3200, it's going to be assigned to me or another investigator. And that's going to be a little complaint like this, and then we're going to proceed to go out on the case. One of the main things I want to point out is that people often think that there is abuse and neglect, and now we're coming in there and we're going to make people do things, that we have some type of authority to make people do things, and that's not the case at all. The majority of the time, we're going into these investigations with no formal authority whatsoever. And people could choose not to cooperate at all. And they won't be held accountable necessarily at all for choosing not to cooperate, refusing to talk to us, refusing to let us in the home. They would never have a confirmed case just because they're unwilling to talk to us, unwilling to cooperate. So the question's, how do you get in the door? And how do you get into a conversation with them and start figuring out what's going on? And that's entirely due to engagement and your ability to learn how to communicate with them and get past the initial conflict and emotion and get them to understand that you're there to understand. Try to help assess the overall situation for the purpose of helping them. If you can do that effectively, everyone opens the door. Everyone talks to you. I can say that it's been very rare I've ever had anyone not let me in. I think that's another thing you would expect with a complaint, that people might be prone to be a little defensive, not want to let you in the door. But, yeah. So I just want to promote that so with that, being that most of my interventions are with complete informal, interventions of just communicating with them. Anyone can really do that. Because I'm not coming in there with any court orders or any formal authority to make people do anything. I'm just communicating with them like anyone could do, like grandma could do, like the school principal or teacher could do, like the counselor could do. Okay? So as far as the intervention part of it, we're always going to look at the overall. Regardless of what the complaint is, it'll always be assigned with a particular code, whether it be physical abuse or physical neglect, and a little explanation of what's going on. But investigations always are going to be, you're just trying to learn as much as you can about the situation. Try to figure out as much as you can about the family needs. And overall, I literally ask myself, how am I going to leave the situation better than I found it? So sometimes a lot of how you leave the situation better is that you're just simple things like providing people with education about various things. Could be just about how the education system works, how friend of the court works, or maybe they have no idea how to access services and they want to. So I'm coming in and I explain that, and they're actually completely willing to do all those things once they understand what those things are and how to go about doing that. Sometimes it's just solving a lot of simple logistical problems. Like a common one is kids not getting their meds at school and things like that. Well, a lot of times we just work out simple solutions of having them sign the paperwork so the school can administer those meds, and working with a doctor about getting a better supply to the school so it's not an every month problem. I spend a lot of time with conflict resolution with people. I'm getting them together, and it's a part of my team case practice model is to do more of that and do a better job of doing that. Getting all the people involved, such as grandparents often, both parents who are not too eager to sit at the same table with each other. Because those toxic relationships and unresolved conflicts between them is what's really at the core of all the other things that keep coming up, bits and pieces, this complaint, that complaint. It's really because overall that both parents and these other caregivers have an equal stake in the child's life, but because they can't get along with each other, results in any number of problems. So I spend a lot of time in my investigations learning that from people, and then trying to help them resolve that, and even more so try to get a service provider who can work on that a little bit more long term. So I do want to say that we do access formal authority through the courts in more serious cases. But that's the main distinction that I just want people to understand about CPS is that we don't have formal authority until we go to the court with a petition and then the court is the one who has the authority, and we kind of carry out the will of the court at that point after we file a petition and make those recommendations. So, with the filing of a petition, there is like a burden of proof, and it's important to talk about that a little bit because a lot of people can get frustrated about like, these kids are obviously in a poor situation. CPS is not doing anything about this. When we go to court, it's a lower standard of proof than like a criminal justice system is. It's a preponderance of evidence, so greater than 51%, like burden of evidence. But we still have to go there to try to prove that something has happened or some type of neglectful behavior like has occurred. So just want to, like everyone to be aware that if we don't have any of that evidence, we can't necessarily have the option of going to court and actually getting the court to issue any orders for anything to happen or to force people to do things. So with all this other things that I've talked about, a lot of that is what our reasonable efforts are too. So if we do end up going to court, we need to establish like all the things that we've tried to do already, all the least restrictive things that we've attempted that have been unsuccessful. And that's another point for like mandated reporters. It's really helpful is to understand that we all have a stake in those reasonable efforts because it's not just what CPS has done to try to intervene and help a family. It's what all the other service providers have done too. So it's very helpful when like other people who are involved kind of keep track of all the things that they've really tried to do to like help people, and that they still feel like it's an abusive or neglectful situation, that here's what I'm observing. We've really tried to do all these things. We've really tried to be strength-based, and we're still concerned about the child. We still think there's an imminent risk here. That helps us out a lot. So if we have to bring like a threat and harm, in other words, nothing has happened, but we're concerned that something will, type of petition to the court, then we have enough information to where like we can have a compelling argument for the court to step in and like help us out a little bit more. So in regards to like mandated reporting, I just wanted to say like a few things about that. We never want people to delay making a report. But I do want people to be mindful of a few things. We have on-call workers. Like I said, I'm going to be on call tonight. But most of us are working during like business hours. And we do receive like a lot of just wait till the end of the day to call situations. A lot of wait till the end of the week, like end of the day on Friday to make the complaints. And this makes things very difficult. We're still going to take the complaint and we're still going to go out there and we're going to try to do the best I can. But not only is it more challenging as a after-hours worker from the CPS standpoint, it's also after hours for law enforcement. You're also going to potentially pull a judge, wake him up in the middle of the night to try to get him to, read your petition and issue an order. It's very difficult to make things happen when things could have been reported earlier in the day, earlier in the week. So it's very important to be mindful of that. Also, don't be anonymous. We get a lot of complaints where people are anonymous. It's against the law for us to tell anybody who you are anyways. So the only thing you're being anonymous to is then us. And we only get this, you might have said a lot of information, but we only get a little bit. So we always want to follow up with you, try to get more information. And then if you're anonymous, we can't do that. So there's really no risk that people are really going to know who you are and come retaliate against you, because we're not going to tell anybody. So never be anonymous in the complaint. It's very helpful for investigators to get a head start on who we might be able to contact to get more information. So if at the time of making a complaint, you could just look up real quick, and if you have the ability to do so, and figure out like other people who are involved, relatives-wise. If you know about counselors who are involved, get the name and the organization, and put together this list of people, that can really streamline the investigative process if we can know all of that information ahead of time. It's very, very helpful. Can't stress that enough when it says, Grandma, this number might be a good person to talk to. This counselor, this number might be a good person to talk to. Then an hour into the investigation, I know quite a bit about like what's going on ahead of time. It's really helpful. And there's also like a issue of, I don't want to compromise the investigation by talking to children about what's going on. So, and that is a concern sometimes if you have something serious, like you feel like this is a sexual abuse case. I'm scared that if I interviewed the child, that could compromise law enforcement and CPS investigation of these concerns. So that is like a real thing to be mindful of, but that doesn't mean that you can't look into matters a little bit more. I mean, a lot of times it's like, I'm uncertain, so there I call. It's okay to talk to the child a little bit and listen to them. It's okay to reach out and talk to a few people to figure out what's going on. That really wouldn't compromise the investigation. The main thing is that they don't want someone doing a full-out interview with people where they're asking a lot of penetrating questions about the situation and documenting all that, because that could be a problem later on if we're re-interviewing the child about the same things. But as long as you're not doing that, you're not going to compromise the investigation at all. So feel free to like explore it a little bit more, be a little bit more certain about what's going on, so then we can start an investigation off on the right foot. Other than that, I just have a couple more points that I think are important to make. Everybody who's part of the child welfare system has a difficult job. And sometimes we're not always that nice to each other. So I think that it's important to always like see everybody in the a positive light and expect the best out of everyone, and remember that we're all working towards the same goals. We're all on the same team here, and we're all trying to address the same issues with families. And with that, also that it's important to be positive overall, and being strength-based with families. Something that's talked about a lot, and I feel like applied not enough. So in closing, like child welfare services are often regarded as like a thankless job that can be very frustrating. But even if you help 1 out of 10, even 1 out of 100 situations, you're really doing a service to the children and the families and for society overall. So that's why I enjoy my job. That's why I like doing it. And I guess that's what I'll close on.
Can you hear me? Okay. So my name is Dinetta Clark, and I am the Director of Community-Based Services at D.A. Blodgett St. John's. And that basically consists of all of the counseling, case management, and mentoring programs there at our agency. So today I get to talk about the effects of child abuse and neglect, and I guess I shouldn't assume, but the major effects of child abuse and neglect are the increased risk of emotional and behavior problems in children. So that is, it kind of bounces, it goes along with what Lucy was saying with those adverse childhood events, and then a little bit about what Daniel was talking about. I'm going to talk a little bit about family systems. So those behavioral problems can be increased behavioral problems, so increased issues, or they can be decreased issues. So we see behavioral acting out, in the community, in the home, more conflict within the family home, behavioral acting out in the school, all sorts of things. Or it can be on the opposite end. People tend to recognize the acting out behaviors and do not recognize as frequently those children that reduce their behaviors. They isolate themselves. Those are the kiddos that generally fly under the radar, but they have some serious impact, and those should also be addressed also. Some of those concerns could also play out in the academic setting with regard to decrease in school grades, like reduction in, falling from A's and B's to D's and E's. Some of those things can happen. One of the major things that we see a lot of is the trauma and the impact that trauma has. So what I'm going to talk about is basically like what we do about it in our agency. With trauma being so huge, that we really try to be what's called a trauma-informed agency. And being trauma-informed is very different from receiving trauma services, although we do both. I'll talk a little bit about that. But the trauma-informed piece is something that any and everybody can do at any given time. It really is about creating a safe space, creating that warm, welcoming environment for children and families to feel comfortable. If you do not provide a safe place, then you risk you risk engaging families in services, and you really risk, the bigger thing for me is the re-traumatization of children and families. So we really try hard to be a trauma-informed agency, and that really consists of looking at the family, children and families, and on a holistic basis, taking cultural considerations into play as we interact with children and families, those sorts of things. With regard to the service array that we provide services for children and families from birth to 18. Where we are really heading, the direction that we're heading is more evidence-based models, and those are things that show proven outcomes to work with the family systems. So a couple of evidence-based models that we offer are multisystemic therapy. That works with the older teens. They are usually involved in some type of delinquent behaviors. CPS may be involved, or juvenile court may be involved. We get referrals from both. We also do what's called brief strategic family therapy. So the purpose of that is to really focus on the family system. There's been a history of treating the child and then sending them back into an environment that is not very conducive of them being able to effectively implement the strategies that they have learned in the counseling. So we've taken an approach to work with the entire family. With that brief strategic family therapy, the entire family needs to be present all of the time in order to engage in services. And we have found that although we haven't been implementing that model very long, we have found some significant gains in utilizing that model. That model doesn't focus primarily on the child's behavior. So I'm going to use you as an example. So if Daniel just cutting up in the community, in the school, I'm not necessarily going in the home talking about how to fix Daniel. I'm more trying to address how is the family addressing, or how is the family responding when Daniel was doing these things, and what can we do? What type of coping strategies can we offer this family? What can we do to help support you as a family unit to help support Daniel, that will ultimately help support Daniel in the long run? So we're taking an approach to help the family look at things in a different perspective, if that makes sense. That's just one example. Another key evidence-based model that we provide is the trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy. Again, I mentioned that trauma is really huge. So one thing I want to mention about trauma is really in the eye of the beholder. So we work to process those events through education. Again, taking this family systems model, we include the families in that process. We work with the child one-on-one. We work with the family unit. We do some conjoint sessions together, and working with all of them, we help the children feel comfortable with sharing their story, their trauma story. Once they're able to share their story, it helps with getting past that traumatic experience, if that makes sense. Going into early childhood, we focus on, some attachment issues with, again, that family model. We work with parents to understand the importance of attachment at an early age. How important touch is, why, how to handle things when your child is crying, or if they're meeting developmental milestones. So with all of these services, I passed out, and I have some more information available for the variety of services that we offer. But the key thing is that we try to include the entire family systems, look at the holistic model, and we also do not treat things individually. For example, there may be, mental health issues, but there's also these complex needs that impact the family also. Could be housing issues, could be transportation issues. So we treat those mental health needs and those complex needs together to help support the family. And all of those things together kind of piggyback off of some of the things that Lucy was saying, some of the things that Daniel was saying, really trying to get that family unit, build those coping skills, coping strategies, reduce those risk factors, and encourage and help them to be more self-sufficient, so that they're not involved in the CPS system, so that they're not dependent on our services long term. So that's a lot of the rationale and reasons as to why we do the services that we do at our agency. We also try to do things that are not so formal. We try to encourage families to increase their own natural supports. That's, again, focusing on them not being so dependent on formal services. So it could be the church, it could be neighbors, it could be support groups that are available in the community, or it may be the mentoring programs. That's where our mentoring programs really come in, because we have one program in particular that mentors young moms. They match, we match adult mentors with young moms, and they help walk alongside them. And then we also provide the Big Brother, Big Sisters, and those two models are very similar, but the one with the young moms, it really kind of targets helping them parent, not necessarily helping them parent, but helping them build their parenting skills.
Hi, my name is Lori Nyquist, and I am thankful for the opportunity to speak with you today about a subject I feel very passionate about, which is hope and healing for children. Trauma, well, first of all, I just want to say my job as a therapist at Families Forever Counseling, it's a very small private practice. There's only 4 of us there, but we're very busy. And we work primarily with adoptive families and foster families that are struggling with these issues of trauma and attachment. And I just, thinking about this, I realized 10 years ago, I really didn't know about trauma. 10 years ago, I'm going to share with you a little personal story. 10 years ago, my husband and I would consider our family a happy family. We had 3 children. We were homeschooling at the time, and we were excited to be adopting a little girl from China. And so we were waiting for a notice to come in the mail, or travel notice, that we could head to China. And so September 2006, we got that travel notice. Our oldest son was studying Eastern Hemisphere. We thought it'd be an awesome field trip for him to go to China with us. And we brought him along and left our 2 middle kids with their grandparents. And I think what my husband and I thought was we would adopt a sad little girl, and we'd bring her into our family and happy her up with our wonderful family. And that didn't quite work out the way we had thought it would. She was 19 months old. She had been in an orphanage that whole time. And in actuality, we did adopt a sad little girl, but we just didn't realize that what sad and grieving looks like when you have a history of 19 months of neglect and trauma is rage, night terrors, meltdowns all the time, and basically out of control behavior. And so for us, this was a real wake-up call. And just to clarify, I don't mean like a 2-year-old temper tantrum when you don't get the color sucker you want. I knew what that was from my experience with my 3 other children. This was, what it looked like was very different. It was every time we went to transition. So if we needed to go to the bank, I would put my kids in the car, I'd put my daughter in her car seat, and it would cause a rage. Or if I needed to bring my oldest son to piano lessons, put all the kids in the car, put my daughter in a car seat, it would be another rage. This was night terrors that would wake up my daughter screaming and kicking the wall so violently that I was afraid one of our neighbors would call Daniel over here and report us because they thought we were beating our child. And we weren't beating our child. We were just trying to comfort and console her the same way we had comforted and consoled our 3 other children. But it just seemed to escalate her fear when we were trying to help her. But our daughter, Sophie, wasn't being bad. She was doing the very best she could. Looking back, she not only was grieving the loss of everything she knew, her country, her culture, her language, her friends, but she just had a completely incorrect blueprint for doing relationships. So it felt like we went from normal and happy to completely chaotic and terrifying. And I became a desperate parent. I began to feel uptight, anxious, overwhelmed at the thought of trying to bring her anywhere or bring anyone into our house because I just never knew when a rage was going to erupt. So what happened for me was it just led me on this quest to learn everything I could about trauma and attachment. I had 3 main reasons that I wanted to go on this quest. 1, our family was in a state of trauma. And this is what I learned, is when you bring someone with trauma into your house, you don't just have a person with trauma, you have a whole family with trauma. And my husband and I wanted to help our adopted daughter heal, and we really didn't know how to do that. And finally, I just wanted to become healthier myself in my responses to her and knowing how to help her. So what this quest or journey meant was reading massive amounts of books and going to every training, every workshop, every conference on trauma or attachment that I could find anywhere, no matter where it was. And bless my husband's heart, he helped support this because he was on the same page. So I began to have a glimmer of hope. I began to number my good days, not as the days where my daughter didn't have a rage, but as the days where I could stay calm, cool, and collected regardless of her behavior. Because I realized I couldn't control her behavior, but I could control mine most of the time. Right. I began to recognize her lack of having a parent for the first 19 months meant she had no one there to soothe her or comfort her when she was scared, tired, lonely, or hungry. Because you simply can't attach securely to a revolving staff of orphanage workers. And so I've shared with you just a little bit of this story of what trauma looked like in our family. Every day that I work with families, I see similar stories, same problem, different flavor. I find myself being able to relate to almost every parent coming in with a child or teen that has a history of trauma, abuse, or neglect. One of my main goals as I work with families is to share my own story openly. For me, the biggest epiphany came when I realized I was part of the problem. I was overreacting to my daughter regularly. I wasn't aware of how my own history impacted my parenting. I was letting her behavior control my behavior. Once I realized that I could only help her heal if I stayed calm and regulated myself, that changed everything. And so now I am convinced that helping our children heal is directly linked to our willingness to admit as parents we are part of the problem. If we can admit this and look at our own contribution, I have great hope. If a parent can't or won't, I seriously question my ability to help that family. So a little bit about infant and adult attachment. Part of what I do in my work is to talk to parents about their own attachment style. And the current thinking that we have on attachment is comes from John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Bowlby, you might be familiar with him, wrote an attachment trilogy. In the 30s, he worked with delinquent boys, and he found that they all kind of had a common denominator, and that was disruption in relationship with a significant person, a parent in their life. And that led him to be commissioned by the World Health Organization in World War II to study orphans. Because at that time, a lot of parents were sending kids away to be safer, in a safer place, but in reality what was happening is the children weren't necessarily feeling safer being sent away, and many of them were failing and perishing because they were away from their parents. Bowlby observed that separated infants go to extraordinary lengths, crying, clinging, frantically searching, to prevent separation from a parent or reestablish proximity. And then his student, Mary Ainsworth, designed The Strange Situation. Anybody heard of that before? That is considered the gold standard for studying infant attachment. And so what it was, it's something that takes place in a lab. It takes only 30 minutes, usually a mom and a 1-year-old, could be a dad and a 1-year-old, but at the time she was using moms. And what she would do was she would have 2 separations and 2 reunions. So the 1-year-old baby would be in a lab with their mom. The mom would leave 2 times, and then the mom would come back 2 times. And what she did was she looked at how this 1-year-old did the reunion with its mother. So she was looking at 4 characteristics of the reunion to assess the child's attachment style. Proximity seeking, did the 1-year-old go to the mom to be close? Contact maintaining, did it go to the mom and want to be near the mom? Did it resist? So did it go to the mom but then resist the mom? And then avoidance, did it just completely ignore the mom when she came back in? What is completely astounding about this research is Ainsworth discovered by age 1, a child has already established a blueprint, not only for their relationship with their primary caregiver, but for all relationships for the rest of their life. So age 21, age 34, age 48, for the rest of their life, they take this blueprint that they learned by 1 year old and they use it in every relationship. So that's good news and bad news. The good news is if we got a secure relationship, we carry that with us. If we got an insecure attachment style, we carry that with us. What's the good news is that we can change our attachment style. So that's good news. And also that the brain is plastic. So that means we can learn new things, right? What John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth discovered were 4 different attachment styles. Secure is what we want. There's 4 hallmarks of a secure attachment. Able to give nurturing care in relationships, able to receive nurturing care, able to negotiate our needs, which just means ask for what we want or need, and being okay with the autonomous self. That just means I'm okay if I'm alone, and I'm okay if I'm with people. I can do both. It sounds easy, but it's not necessarily easy. Insecure, avoidant, is a style where if we come from a background where our feelings and our need for personal connection were dismissed, we learned by age 1 to mask our emotions. So maybe you got the message either verbally or non-verbally, it's okay to be happy and cheerful, but it's not okay to be sad, hurt, angry, or jealous. Then what you learn by age 1 is, I have to wear a mask. I have to be okay. I have to take care of myself. So what these 1-year-olds learn is by expressing themselves, they meant they were risking rejection and distancing from their attachment figure. Okay, so they're already masking by age 1 and then carrying that into adulthood. So as an adult, they find it extremely hard to express needs, admit weakness or failure, depend on others, or be around emotional intensity. Okay, that's what avoidant looks like. That's insecure. Ambivalent is another insecure style, and the sort of what determines that is if we come from a background where we were either, there was inconsistency of care or there was intrusiveness. So it just means either the caregiver was preoccupied with their own mental health needs, illness, substance abuse, having to work several jobs, or if the caregiver is too intrusive, over-involved, or needy. So even though they're physically present, they're not emotionally present. And then the last attachment style is called insecure disorganized. So all these other styles have a plan. Secure has a plan. Avoidant, even though it's insecure, they have a plan. Ambivalent has a plan. What disorganized, the problem with that is there is no plan. There is no one style. It's a combination. So you see a little avoidant, a little ambivalent, a little secure, and a little of who knows what. And it's very small percentage of people that have this. Only 7 to 10% in the general population have this disorganized style. But in the population that most of us work with, it's 80 to 85% have this disorganized style. How does this come about? Well, if a child comes from a background where they have a caregiver that's either frightened themselves or frightening, they develop a disorganized style. So abuse, basically. What's happening is they have a circuit in the brain that's saying, go to your caregiver, they'll help you. They have an opposite circuit saying, run for your life, your caregiver is not safe. And so because the caregiver can't give consistent care, the child can't form a strategy to have a relationship. So our natural instinct is to seek comfort and closeness from our caregiver, but if the caregiver's actions put us in danger if we approach them, then we don't feel safe. So lots of times you'll see kids with stereotomies, the rocking back and forth, the head banging, the repetitive behaviors, and what they're basically trying to do is regulate themselves. A big part of what I do is helping parents to understand their contribution to the problem. So what I try to do initially is just taking the time to initially explore their own history with their family of origin. What did they learn about attachment? What deficits do they have in their parenting as a result? This is not about pointing fingers either at their own parents or at them. I believe most parents are trying their best. If we grew up with a secure attachment style, which the majority of us did, what work do we need to do to become more secure? Are we willing to do the hard work of making sense of our past so we can be emotionally available and present to our children? And so finally, there's an earned secure attachment style, and that is for those of us who may have not experienced emotional availability of a caregiver growing up, but through taking the journey, looking at their past, making sense of their past, being with a safe person, you can still arrive at this place of being secure if you're willing to make the journey. I think another thing that we learned by having our child with a history of trauma is a big piece of healing involves feeling safe. Felt safety is a concept I learned about and I did not understand. My husband and I knew our daughter was safe when we brought her home from China. We were safe people, we had a safe family, and we were providing food, clothing, and shelter. So we just assumed she felt safe. But what we didn't realize is she didn't feel safe. And we had to learn to pay attention to our body language, our tone, our facial expression, our pace of life in order to help her feel safe. One thing I notice with the families that I see is many of their children are coming to them with neurochemistry that is completely different. Trauma changes the brain, we know that. And so what we are seeing is kids that have too many excitatory neurotransmitters and not enough inhibitory. So they have too much cortisol and things that are making them revved up and not enough serotonin and things that are going to calm them down. And so this is something that we can work on, is paying attention to what are we doing to help them have more serotonin and keep them calm. And some of the things, just to conclude this, is some things that we can do as parents and caregivers is be compassionate, be proactive, think holistically, the whole child. Create an environment that feels safe to them. Encourage them to use their words and then listen to their words. A couple weeks ago, it was a beautiful day. It was 70 degrees. It was sunny with a breeze, and my older children were all either with friends or work. And my youngest daughter, Sophie, asked me to go to the park with her, and so we were just swinging together, enjoying the beautiful day. And I was feeling reflective, and I was thinking back and just feeling thankful for the healing that's happened in the past 10 years, not just in my daughter, but also in me and my relationship with her and the relationships with the whole family. And so this hasn't been an easy journey. It's been 10 years, and we're still on it, and I think there will still be bumps, but I'm thankful to be in a hopeful place.
I think we have enough to go around. I'm going to keep a mic because I'm going to ask you for questions. And when you ask a question, I'm going to repeat it, and it's going to sound kind of silly or goofy, but we need it for the video camera. So I see a question already. The first question is a question that I think a lot of us have. We talk a lot in social work and education and other fields that work with kids. How do we take care of ourselves? We experience a lot of trauma or secondary trauma as a result of working with some of these situations, and I think we've seen it today. And it's easy to say you have to leave your work at work, but it doesn't always happen that way. So first of all, how do we take care of ourselves, prevent burnout, address secondary trauma, etc.? The second question, I think, is a really quick question in terms of, is a written testimony as effective as an oral testimony in court? And so is that an okay way of communicating? And then how do we, I think it's the third question, if we see children being removed from the home and we think that that's maybe the best thing for them, how do we kind of process it when the child repeatedly goes back to the home? And thinking about, who's making those decisions, what entails those decisions, and how do we process? So
You were trying to break it down a little bit. You just said like many questions.
I know. Well, okay, so I think it's three main questions. Self-care, second question, written versus oral in court, and then third question is how do we process when a child maybe the outcome isn't what we want. So how do we process that?
Yeah, the court doesn't always do what we want. I just had a case where there was 6 prior terminations, and so it's what we call a birth match case if they have a new baby, essentially. And the kids are obviously removed for a reason. Very serious things had happened to all those previous children, so we'd be concerned about that and file a petition right off the bat to remove that child. But unfortunately, in that case, which sometimes is the case with different attorneys, different judges, most importantly, the judges and referees have their own opinions, and they really have the say. And some of them have a disposition to think that kind of like a criminal justice perspective of what has happened and proving that or not disproving that. And they don't really think about the threat and harm part of it. Most of my cases are honestly threat and harm cases that I confirm, and I've filed a lot of petitions because I'm concerned that something is going to happen or emotional harm is happening right now, but not that a specific incident happened that you can just prove that this happened on that date type of thing. So because the child was just born, nothing had happened to that child, so essentially they sent the child home. We'd all be concerned about that. So as far as the self-care on it is well, what do we think should happen here? What's in the best interest of the child, outcomes-wise? And then you have to just be focused on what's your role in that, and knowing that I did everything I could to try to help the situation, including filing the petition and going there and advocating for, the recommendations that I had. Once a child's sent home, and I'm faced with that, then it's like, what is everything that you can do now? So now it's all the services in place and trying to help the parents and trying to prevent the abuse from happening. So it's shifting focus, but it's still like, what outcomes are you aiming at and what's within your power, and knowing that there's limitations to your influence and just doing everything you can. As far as the
Yeah, I
question
think-
about the,
Yeah, do oral versus written,
Okay.
but then maybe Dinetta, it looks like, has more ideas on self-care.
all right. I would say it's always better for someone to be there in person. Most of those decisions, like, those are prosecutor decisions. They decide like what they're gonna use for evidence. If they want to submit just like a affidavit of someone's like statements, and that's sufficient. I wouldn't worry about that too much. Basically, if the prosecutor thinks that the written statements, enough value as far as like what you had to say about it, then just be happy that you don't have to sit and wait at court all day. And you can trust that like your opinion is going to be known.
So with regard, can you hear me? Okay. All right. Now you can hear me? All right. So with regard to self-care or whatnot, my responses are going to sound really simple, but they can be really effective. One of the main things that I would say is supervision. You have to utilize your supervisors and your team around you. You have to take that time to process the things that you're going through in that supervision time. The other key thing that I want to say, which follows suit with what Daniel was saying, is scope of practice. You have to you can only do what you are able to do that is within your scope of practice. So as a teacher, you have to stay in your teacher lane to a certain extent. You're not able to have the impact that you would like to have on those external sources. So remembering that you need to stay in, and that's the hard part. That's really the hard part is staying in your lane. But when they come back, like for example, the student that you described is still in your classroom. So you have the opportunity to take advantage of creating that safe space. Helping that family, engaging with that family and becoming potentially a natural support for that family to help be more effective, because it's really about, life is really about, it really is about how you engage these families that you really have the most concern about. So if you come in from a caring perspective or whatnot, then you may be that person that person comes to for support or what, and then you able to, and becoming familiar with what's available in the community. Like for example, CPS is a great resource, but a lot of the services that are available in the community can be self-referred. You can go there before it gets to that point. So the families are, you can help them become aware of that you want to be preventative and do some of these things, get some of these supports in place before it reached to that point. So that was a long story, but I think the short end of this is everything is about relationships. And as long as you make your efforts, active efforts to engage in the relationships with the families that you serve, then the one family that you are able to help will be so much more fulfilling for the three that you can't help. And that is what keeps you going.
Okay, and so just really quickly to repeat the question for the camera, can Daniel comment a little bit on how CPS deals with neglect cases, medical neglect cases, and I'm assuming knowing when it's neglect or identifying how to identify the neglect cases, particularly medical neglect.
Yeah, you do hear much more about serious cases of like sexual abuse and serious physical abuse. Like, I feel like that's what the media will focus on because I guess it's more newsworthy. The majority of cases are neglect cases. I'd say like the thing that I have had the most is domestic violence, which would be considered like threat and harm, but also considered neglectful as well. It's always going to break down to the overall, regardless of what specifically is being discussed. And in simple terms, is there something that the parent should clearly be doing that they're not doing? Then that'll one way or another be considered neglect if it's going to result in some type of harm to the child. Like as far as physical neglect's concerned, that's a common complaint that's denied because the standard for actually being neglectful is pretty low. So children can be a little bit dirty, wear the same clothes, and the housing situation might not be great. But it has to be like, how is the child actually going to be harmed by the situation? And a lot of times, those borderline issues will not be confirmed cases. With medical neglect, there has to, like one of the key elements of that is that it has to be like a diagnosed condition, like by like a doctor or a doctor level psychologist, psychiatrist, and that there's pretty clear evidence that there's something that the parent should have been doing regarding that medical care that they're not doing. So it's like, it could be as more simple, like you have a severe injury and you're not bringing the kid to a doctor, but most of the time it's not. Most of the time it's like, this child has mental health needs, I think they're self-harming. We get those types of medical neglect cases all the time. And then it's like a matter of like, did you know about the self-harm behaviors? And if so, did you do anything to address them? If you didn't take reasonable steps that society would all agree are steps that any parent should take, like bring them to the doctor, seek counseling for that. If you haven't done that, then that would certainly be like a medical neglect case. I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay, so distinguishing between witnessing an adverse event versus actually personally experiencing an adverse event, and how do, are the effects still just as detrimental?
I mean, in the study that the CDC did, they asked that simultaneously, and so it's have you experienced or have you witnessed, and therefore the findings are based upon you answering one, or they don't distinguish. I know that research is being done to be able to determine what the distinction might be between, but what we found already through the evidence is that, I don't want to say by simply, because it's not simply, but by being present when other abuse is occurring or when other household dysfunctions occurring, even if you yourself aren't the one, the victim, so to speak, that it can have the same neurological, biological impacts, the same kind of trauma and toxic stress as if you had experienced it yourself. So, for example, if you're in a household where there is a significant amount of yelling and throwing, perhaps, of items, but you are not actually physically harmed, your chemistry, your biology, and your brain can still have that same response, which would be that fight or flight response, and that puts you in a hyper state. And so the answer simply is, from what we know, yes. If you're witnessing it, it can be just as harmful as if you're experiencing it yourself.
I'd like to add that from our perspective, it's always going to be all the children that are considered. One child will never be singled out, even though most complaints, I would say the majority of complaints will be like something happened to this child or something's going on with this child. And more times than not, there's other children, and it'll always be a case that includes everybody, and rarely does one child be removed from a home without them all being removed, because it's assumed that there's a threat of harm to the other children as well.
This might be a good one for Lori. The question is, just when you're observing children and they seem like they're functioning and at what we call a normal, developmental rate, is there another time that trauma might kind of emerge. Maybe it doesn't emerge at certain points in their developmental stages.
What we have seen is research shows there's swift brain growth at certain ages, so prenatally, and then the first year of life, and then age 8, 12, and 14. No, 8, 12, and 16 are the times when there's swift brain growth. So if something is off, it shows up more at those ages. And the other thing, age 5 is when kids start school, and lots of times things show up then. That's not a period of swift brain growth, but lots of times there's a heavier load on them because they're in school now. Kindergarten's all day, right? So there's a heavier load, so sometimes things will show up at that age as well. And then another thought I had when you were talking is, and we haven't talked about it here, but dissociation is, sort of like a defense mechanism where feelings, thoughts, and experiences stop integrating. So I'm thinking about it's a defense mechanism, so it helps young kids often to kind of check out, and that can happen where they check out and they do that, and then they check back in, and so that helps them survive what would be unsurvivable. And it works for them, it helps them survive, but then it becomes more of a problem as they become older.
So unfortunately, we're getting close to the end of time, and so what I want to do really quickly is just give our panelists 30 seconds, so not very long, just to say any closing thoughts that you might have, things that you maybe forgot, a sound bite for your agency, anything that you want, and then I'll get on with kind of the housekeeping of the end of the session.
I will say my infomercial is that we all have a role in prevention. If you're not trained already as a mandated reporter, we can train you on that, Family Futures. You can visit our website to sign up. We can come right to your agency, or we offer them around the community, but that's one of your first steps in terms of being a very informed community member, is being aware of your role. Even if your employment place doesn't require you to report, I still encourage, if you're interested in child welfare, for you to become aware of the signs and symptoms and how you can report. You can even hear it from a folk like Daniel, might be one of your facilitators. And last, we're a really resource-rich community, so if you're not aware of the resources that are available for families, familyresourceguide.info is our resource guide, and that lists hundreds of programs that are available, very much accessible, and it's just sometimes that we don't know of their existence. So let's try and support our families proactively when possible.
I want to say, encourage everyone to be committed to lifelong learning as it relates to communication skills and your interpersonal ability, working with people, because it's enhancing those skills is what's going to allow you to engage them and get beyond some of those barriers so you can have a productive dialogue, figure out what those needs are, so then you can come up with some solutions.
One of the things that I've already said, one of the things that I like to get across, everything is about relationships. So if you take the opportunity to build those relationships, then you'd be surprised at how impactful they could be. I would also like to, reiterate how important it is to be trauma informed and aware of creating those safe environments, those safe places. The questions that we had today just, to me, kind of reiterated how important it is to be trauma informed at all times. The other thing that I want to point out that wasn't discussed much today is the cultural piece. It is very, very important to become culturally competent, culturally aware of things that are around, or engaging in the communities that you're working with. Lucy was talking earlier about health disparities and whatnot. That is a tremendously huge issue. So always continuing that education and working hard to becoming more culturally aware and culturally competent is also key. With regard to our agency, D.A. Blodgett St. John's, we I like to say, this is just my opinion, that we provide services at all ends of the spectrum. For example, the services that we offer can be, used as a preventative measure. It can be self-referral. And for those families that are reuniting, or there's reunification, or we can also support those families as well. So I feel like we, as an agency, we provide the full service array for children and families in helping them be strong, successful, resilient families. So again, I have some flyers for our services, and I have some business cards for anyone who's interested.
I just want to build a little bit on what Daniel said and just add about being a lifelong learner, and just you must all be, because you're here today. So thank you for coming, and also just that mindfulness, that idea of being kind of aware of ourselves and aware of us in relationship to other people, and not being afraid to look at your past and make sense of your past, I think will help you in all your relationships, whether it's with friends, with family, with boyfriends, with spouses, with children. And I just want to encourage you to do that. And thank you all for being a wonderful audience today and for coming.
Yes, absolutely. So I have 4 things for you. Number 1, please fill out your evaluations before you leave and bring them up, and we'll collect them. Secondly, if you haven't signed in yet and you came in a little bit late, make sure to sign in on the sign-in sheet up front. Even if you have people that you know who came in late and had to leave early, sign in for them. I'd really appreciate that, and we'd really appreciate that. Third, I see there are more snacks out there, and I hate food to go to waste, so please bring some for the road and take it along with you. And then fourth, and my favorite thing to say is, I have really enjoyed this panel. I always love being a moderator because I get a front row seat to the understanding. And so I just wanted to say thank you to 3 groups. First of all, thank you all for joining. Thank you for listening, for being concerned and wanting to learn more. I want to thank Family Futures for hosting this and for bringing these important issues to the forefront. And then finally, I want to thank our panelists so much for just taking this time and being willing to share your expertise with us. So let's give them a warm thank you.